the real news is that tonight we have Mark Hurst, who founded Creative Good, who you might know from the Good Experience Live or GEL conferences, and whose new book is called Customers Included. Please give a big hand to Mark Hurst. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Christian. Thanks to Steve and Paul, who's not here, unfortunately, but everybody at BayCHI who made it possible for me to come. I'll get to this in a second. As it turns out, I have spoken at BayCHI in this theater once before, 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years ago. And we were talking at dinner about what exactly that was about. Was anybody here in 2003? You were there, Steve? Wow, that's impressive. Do you remember what that talk was about? I was trying to remember. It had something to do with...
You can look it up.
Yeah, no, you don't have to. Maybe after the talk. Tonight I'm going to talk about Customers Included, and I'll just do the obligatory slide here. As Troy McClure says, you may know me from such projects as Creative Good. So I'm from New York, and my company Creative Good is based in New York. I understand this is BayCHI, not New York-CHI, but so it's an honor to be here. But I came in from New York yesterday, and that's my company, Creative Good, that I run with my co-author, Phil Terry. Good To Do is a cloud-based to-do list that I run, which is also described in Bit Literacy, which is my first book, which is free, by the way, and so is Good To Do for free accounts. If you're interested in managing email or tasks, read this. It's free on the Kindle store and the iBook store. A few years old, but the principles still work. And GEL, as Christian mentioned, is my conference. And the videos for basically all 10 years of conferences, they're all online for free. Just go to Vimeo and search for GEL conference. But tonight, I'm not going to really talk about these projects, but instead this, and here, I do have one physical copy, so we'll get this to someone tonight. I'm very proud because this took years of effort, and it's finally here. The pub date was just about a week ago, and we're really happy to be getting it out into the world. So I will, just as a note of warning, I will be mentioning at some point during the talk, we cover this in the book, and I'm sorry not all of you yet have the book, but this is what the book looks like, and it's on Amazon, also customersincluded.com if you're interested. The thesis of the book is very simple. When an entrepreneur or a team or an organization is making some decision or innovation or design that impacts someone else, some end user, it's better to include that person in the design or innovation process rather than totally ignore them. And I brought this up at dinner. It's better to include the end user rather than ignore them. And the person I was talking to said, well, yeah, of course, as though let's move on to more substantive topics. But I have watched this from This Is Broken and through our consulting work at Creative Good. For years, I've been interested in this question: why are things so broken? Why are designs so often bad? Why do companies so often not give customers what they want? Here we have this room full of talented, skilled practitioners, and we have all kinds of methods that we can use. And yet, here I am 10 years later, and here we all are 10 years later, talking in some cases about the same issues. In fact, next month, Don Norman is going to talk about his book, which I read in 1994. Which is still relevant today. It's a great book, so I'm glad you haven't. But why are we still here? Why are we still dealing with the same problems? It's because organizations and teams and the innovation process very often leaves out the customer. And that's what I'm going to explore in the talk tonight. A word on vocabulary. When I say customer, I don't just mean someone in a store shopping for something, although, of course, they are counted in that, they're a customer. But I use Peter Drucker's definition. If you haven't read any Peter Drucker, I would strongly suggest that you look into a book called Practice of Management that he wrote back in the 50s. A customer, as Peter Drucker describes it, is any end user. It could be a consumer. It also could be a patient in a healthcare situation. It could be a student. It could be a citizen who's the quote-unquote customer of a government service, when the government's running, assuming there's services. Anyone who's on the receiving end of some product or service or innovation or experience, I'm going to refer to as the customer tonight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you 3 stories. And then hopefully we'll have some rich Q&A time. So we have 3 stories. The first story is from Africa. The second story is from Arkansas. And the third story is from Brooklyn. And if you stick around to the end, if you're a fan of Brooklyn and hipsters, I promise I will show you an image of a fixed gear bicycle. But that's at the very end. So first, let's start in Africa. This is a story to answer the question that I often get when I describe the thesis of the book. Usually the first question. It goes something like this. Come on, does this really happen? Customers included versus ignored. Come on. Really? I mean, maybe once in a while, but does this really happen? Actually, it happens all the time. And I apologize in advance because if you really buy into this concept, when you go home and when you go to your place of work tomorrow, you're going to begin seeing it everywhere if you don't already. You will see it everywhere in every context. So I apologize that you're going to not be able to shake this. This is one of many, many examples that are covered in the book, but it's one of my favorite stories. It's a story about access to clean drinking water. And some of you may be involved in this issue. Probably everybody in this room knows that's a very important issue worldwide, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where in many places clean drinking water is rare. It's difficult to get to, so not something to take for granted. So this is the clean drinking water. And in 2005, Boing Boing announced a promising new invention, maybe some of you heard of it, called the play pump, which, as Boing Boing described, was a pump that was connected to a children's roundabout, which is essentially a merry-go-round. And the idea was simple and elegant and clever and fun and playful and innovative. Kids would spin on a merry-go-round attached to a pump, and that would pump water out of tap into a bucket. And this is the diagram that came along with that post. There's the merry-go-round, the play pump, and the water goes through some piping, and then out it comes on the other side of a tap. So through children's normal activity of play, they could take care of one of the more important chores in the village. Well, this news of the play pump was very positively received with a lot of excitement, not just online in blogs, but in mainstream media as well. PBS Frontline, which at that time was running a nationally televised program, sent a reporter and a camera crew to Africa to report on the story. And the woman, whose name is Amy Costello, got footage that looked something like this. Brightly colored roundabout and kids spinning around and water pumping, and the kids were delighted. They had new playground equipment, and the water was pumping, and it just looked very joyful. This round, PBS and others, this round of press built up into a wave of attention and positive feeling about the play pump, such that the next year, 2006, at the Clinton Global Initiative in my town of New York City, First Lady of the United States, Laura Bush, stood up and presented a check to Play Pumps International, the company installing play pumps, for $16 million. And this $16 million came from different sources. These are round numbers, about $5 million from the Case Foundation. That's Case as in Steve Case, AOL founder. And $10 million from all of us, US taxpayers, came through USAID, which is a taxpayer-funded organization. There were also celebrities backing the project. Jay-Z around that time held a concert at Madison Square Garden nearby in New York City and raised $250,000 for play pumps, and there were others. So let's review our innovators checklist, the assets that this scrappy startup team had at their disposal. They had a clever design. Well, first of all, let me just state they had good intentions. They had a clever design that addressed a tough problem in the world. They had backing from leaders of technology, business, and government, and from the world of celebrity, and they had an awful lot of money. So Play Pumps International, with these assets, everything an innovator could dream of, went to work installing play pumps in sub-Saharan Africa, and you can guess, naturally enough, what happened next. Completely failed. Completely failed. Within a few years, the Case Foundation publicly withdrew their support from the project. The remaining inventory was sold off to another nonprofit for limited use, and nothing was ever said about play pumps anymore, at least as a living organization. So what happened? What happened? When the play pumps team had done what may appear like all the right things in getting the clever innovation, I'm sure they had several rounds of design to get the colors just right and to think about how to pitch it to the press and to their funders. How did something that had so much momentum go wrong? Well, my argument is that they had a lot of really good things. The money, the celebrity, the press, all those are good things. They had all the elements of a successful innovation except for one. It was innovation missing one ingredient. If you want to know what that you can guess what that missing ingredient was, but the case was broken, finally, by a cheap, low-res, 5-minute YouTube video. That's how the mystery was solved for most of the world. In the small country of Malawi, next door to Mozambique, 2 volunteers with Engineers Without Borders took some handheld camera or video phone and took a video. These were Canadians, Owen Scott and Duncan McNichol. And what they did in their video, they had been working in a village with a play pump for some time, and they had observed what was going on with the play pump. They had done on-the-ground observation, direct observation of the customers in the context of this innovation. And they decided to hold a race between a play pump and an Afrodev, which I'll show you in a second. It's a traditional hand pump, to fill a bucket of water. Okay? So this, I believe, is Duncan, and strapping young man runs over to the play pump, and they start the timer stopwatch, and he starts spinning the play pump as fast as he can, and you can see there's the water coming into the bucket. And they zoomed out and they showed the whole thing happening. He's spinning, the water's coming out. It's working. And finally, the bucket fills with water, and they show this caption. Total time, 3 minutes, 7 seconds. All right. And Duncan's just like, whew, whew. He had really been working out. Then he rests up, and there's a transition in the video, and they go to the second contender, the Afrodev. And you can recognize that as a hand pump, right? You can kind of see, it looks like a pump. And so, same guy, same bucket, and he's pumping as fast as he can, and the caption comes up. Now there he is, as hard as he can. Total time, 28 seconds. Well, that didn't seem to come up in the Clinton Global Initiative. Pump takes 6 times as long as existing pumps. Well, let's just say, let's play devil's advocate. This is all about customers included, and we're talking about access to water in African villages. How come we haven't seen the Africans? How come it's just these 2 Canadian guys? Maybe, why don't we hear from some Africans? Well, Duncan and Owen thought of that. They went to the teachers that they worked with in the village, and they introduced themselves, and they said, there's an organization installing play pumps in this region. Do you have a message that you would like to send to the organization installing play pumps in this area? And the head teacher says, yes. The message is, stop immediately. Okay. Well, you could say, we've heard from the Africans, we've seen the gross mechanical inefficiency of the innovation, but is that really a rigorous study? I mean, it's just one installation, one village. Surely there couldn't be a national, independently commissioned report by a well-regarded research firm on a panoply of play pumps installations. Could there be in Mozambique, commissioned by the government? Why, yes. And this actually happened even before Owen and Duncan made their video. This was pretty early on in the project. Mozambique, the government of Mozambique had roughly 100 play pumps in their country, and somebody high up sensed that something wasn't quite right with the play pumps, and so they brought in a Swiss research agency with the unfortunate name SCAT to take a look at the 100 play pumps, do on-the-ground observation of the pumps, and do some rigorous, and by the way, the resulting report is online. It's for free. You can go get it, and if you want the direct URL, it's in the notes here. But it's not too hard to find. And what SCAT found, among other things, was the following. We found no signs that communities had been consulted prior to installation. Huh? Okay. Well, what does that actually mean? I mean, yeah, see, they weren't including the customer. No, it's actually, it means something specific that's actually pretty bad. What happened was the communities didn't have a choice in getting a play pump, but it's worse than, it's much worse than that. You're in a village, and there's one water source, and it's an AfriDev, and you've had the AfriDev, which, by the way, is like a 50-year-old technology. I mean, it's a very mature technology with a lot of supply chain of parts, and the town already knows how to repair and maintain it. And one day, out of the blue, a Jeep rolls in from outside the village. Some guys jump out of the Jeep, and they run up to the AfriDev, and they rip it out of the ground. And they put a play pump in its place. And you go, what the heck do you think you're doing? And they go, we don't know, someone just told us to do that. They hop back in the Jeep and they leave. Now, instead of an efficient, mature technology hand pump to do its job of pumping water, you've got a merry-go-round. Well, I don't need to tell you all the problems that happen after that, but I'll tell you a couple of them. First of all, kids, okay, it takes 3 minutes, 7 seconds of vigorous spinning to fill one bucket. The SCAT report said that kids, like kids anywhere, spinning vigorously on a merry-go-round, they get dizzy after a couple of minutes. So after they had pumped maybe 2/3 of a single bucket, they would go, you know what, that's enough for today. Let's go play stickball. And they would run off. And that left a need for water to be pumped in the village. Kids were gone, they were off, maybe they were at school. They didn't have, someone calculated it would have taken the kids like 25 hours a day to fill enough buckets to satisfy the village. So who got to pump the water at that point? It was the adult women of the village who had to stand by the play pump and turn it laboriously like this, wondering why they couldn't just use the 6 times more efficient AfriDev that they used to have. So, but actually, that was the better case. It actually got worse, if you can believe it. Because the play pump was an immature technology, it's young, untested. Many of the play pumps broke. And when the play pump broke, remember, the community had not been consulted, had not been involved at all in the planning or the installation. There was no training for repair or maintenance. And as a young technology, there was no supply chain of parts whatsoever. So when the play pump broke, there's no way to fix it, and there's no other water source in the village. And so that's why when the PBS frontline reporter, Amy Costello, went back to Africa, when she saw this project going south, she reported the following. I met women who had been without their supply of clean drinking water for months. No water. And that leads to this grand irony that in our rush to be clever and innovative and world-saving, we, American taxpayers, contributed $10 million to an effort to reduce clean drinking water in Africa. But it's not all bad. On the bright side, the play pump did get nominated by the Cooper Hewitt for a National Design Award. So there is that. Now, what went wrong in the play pump? What was the missing ingredient? Innovation missing one ingredient. What was the ingredient? The customer, right? Any significant involvement of the people who were going to be affected by this decision. Any significant. The aid workers, their video took 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, they described why this should never have been launched. And in order to get that 5-minute video, they had to spend more than an afternoon with the camera crew getting some footage of smiling children. They had to do some real research and take some real time on this. Okay, so were any lessons learned from this misadventure? Well, for that, we go back to the Case Foundation, which I want to emphasize again. I believe they had good intentions, and since this debacle, they have returned to water issues, and I think they're doing much better work now in water issues. But at the moment, when they remember I told you they publicly withdrew their support, it was through a blog post on the blog that they announced it publicly. And their conclusion, in my opinion, was best expressed by this statement. It's the very nature of innovation. We just try things and we take risks. In other words, the play pump failed because it was oh so very innovative. And not only was it innovative, that's the exact definition of innovation, that things are going to fail. And that's what I call the spaghetti method. You just take some noodles and you throw them against the wall and see what sticks. And I won't deny that that is one possible way of conducting innovation, but it's not the only way. It is not the very nature of innovation to do this. That was an extremely risky maneuver to throw the play pump against the wall and see what happened. So the problem with the play pump is that customers were not included, but more specifically, customers were not observed directly to understand their context on the ground before these decisions were really put into process. So in this book, the customers included, I hesitate to call it a process, but it's more like a mindset, has 3 main steps that we return to again and again. And I think they're on the next slide. Yes. First, observe customers directly. Second, discover their key unmet needs. And 3, build a consensus to execute the plan that you've developed. And I'm going to get into each of these in the talk tonight, but the play pump is number 1. That was the failing. They did not observe customers directly. And once they had failed to gain any significant knowledge about their customers and their context, the rest of it was moot. It was almost guaranteed to fail. Okay. Now what happens if a company does include customers in some way with some kind of rigorous research, but doesn't discover their key unmet needs? Then what happens? We're going to find out when we go to Arkansas in our second story. Bentonville, Arkansas. Is everybody here somewhat familiar with the story of Walmart? No? Well. It's a fascinating story. There's a book called Made in America, which profiles the founder of Walmart, the late Sam Walton, who was a brilliant innovator and businessman who, there's more to say about him. But he built Walmart on the basis of 2 benefits that he gave his customers. And he was clear, he was explicit about these. Everybody in the company, the leadership knew what they were, and you could feel it when you walked in the stores. And I think even today, if you go into a Walmart, you can feel it. 2 benefits. Number 1, wide selection of brands. Brands. Wide selection. And number 2, this is the one that's on every discount slip in the entire store. Low prices. Wide selection of brands, low prices. Wide selection of brands, low prices. That's Walmart. It wasn't anything else. He didn't promise anything else. If he delivered those 2, he was going to have a successful company. And he did grow his massive empire of a company based on those 2 things. So keep that in mind in this case study. So it was a few years ago before the Great Recession hit. And remember, some of you remember in like 2006, 2007, the whole idea of upmarket shopping was getting kind of big, and people wanted to treat themselves to better designed items. Well, what happened was that Walmart was doing well, but they noticed that one slice of their customers, the more affluent customers, some of them were beginning to defect to another discount retailer that was promising a more upmarket experience. And that retailer was Target. Thank you. I like to call it Target. It was Target. People were leaving Walmart to shop at Target. And even though Walmart's numbers were fairly strong, this one negative number really bothered some of the leadership in Bentonville. And they began thinking, how come people are leaving? You know why? I think I know why it is. Look at our stores. Of course people would want to go to Target. Our stores are cluttered. And I wasn't privy to all of the different discussions and the political intrigue, but I would imagine that other executives were saying, but remember what Sam said. Wide selection of brands and low prices. Didn't say anything about cluttered or organized, well lit or not so well lit with, cheap, what you call it, fluorescent lighting. Didn't say anything about that. Well, Group A of executives said, I know what we'll do. We're going to run research. We're going to include customers in this conversation. And not only are we going to run research, we're going to run rigorous research. We're going to run a statistically relevant sample size. We're going to go and get hundreds of thousands of customers at checkout to give us their feedback. And so they went forward with a survey that essentially asked customers at checkout one question. And it was this: would you like it if Walmart stores were less cluttered? And hundreds of thousands of customers trundling their cluttered cart to checkout, getting that question, overwhelmingly said, yes. Yes. Oh, that was a wonderful idea. The data came back to Bentonville. They said, we've run customer research. Look at these numbers. Customers love this idea. And thus began an initiative that was called Project Impact. And it had an impact. Now, Project Impact, Walmart is a huge company. It almost defies human understanding how huge this enterprise is. And this one initiative to declutter Walmart stores was spotlighted in the annual report of Walmart for 2, maybe 3 years running. Maybe it was just 2. But it was heavily, spotlighted and underlined, big font and everything. Project Impact. And the idea was to improve the customer experience by decluttering the stores. So they needed someone to lead this, and they found someone. This was a man, and his name escapes me. I should know it. But he had only been at Walmart for a few years, but he had a long 20-year track record in retail working with an upmarket discount retailer. You'll never guess who it was. Target. Thank you. So this Target veteran led an initiative to declutter Walmart stores. You see how the different threads are coming together. And every store took many millions of dollars to renovate. And it was just a massively expensive project to roll out. And a few months into the project, the CEO at the time, a guy named Mike Duke, who I believe is still CEO, got on was speaking at a retailer conference and was asked, hey, Mr. Duke, we want to ask you about your Project Impact. Oh, yes. Yeah. What's your question? Yeah, we just want to know, hey, how come Target's numbers are doing this and Walmart's numbers are doing this? And the next quarter, Walmart's numbers went down again. And the next quarter, Walmart's numbers went down again and again and again. They had a losing season like Walmart has never had before. And analysts were very clear that it was because of the costs of Project Impact and the lack of sales numbers from customers actually coming in and buying things. So what actually happened there? Well, If you really want to understand a difficult phenomenon, you have to think about it from the customer's perspective. So let's be Walmart shoppers for a moment, shall we? For years, we've been going to the same Walmart, Supercenter, whatever, buying different household items, and go to the grocery center. A lot of people in this country buy most or all their groceries from Walmart. Did you know that? Walmart is a huge grocery company. Okay, so we go in. We've been going to this Walmart for a number of years. And we go in, we get our gigantic cart, and we go in and stop. The central aisle of the store, called Action Alley, that's usually piled with discounted stuff and just random products that are on heavy discount, it's completely empty. I mean, it's just empty. And you look in this aisle and that way and down that aisle, it's empty. I mean, there's some products, but it's just like a ghost town. And you're going through and you go, well, this is strange. Let me just go get my groceries. Now, every time you go to Walmart, you need to get your house brand of mayonnaise. And who's got a house brand of mayonnaise? Somebody? What's your house brand? Hellmann's. That was the one I was going to use for the example. Anybody else like Hellmann's? Hellmann's? No? Anyone not like Hellmann's? You like something else? Was it? Best Foods? Okay.
It's the same thing, but west of the Mississippi, it's best.
Okay. Well, let's say we're Hellmann's shoppers, okay? So we go to the grocery section, and every time you go to Walmart, you go to the groceries, you got to get your Hellmann's mayonnaise. And you go to the mayonnaise section, there's no Hellmann's. I don't know if Hellmann's itself went out, but there were common brands like this that just vanished. Where's the Hellmann's? And the clerk, if you can find one, says, sorry, ma'am, we don't carry Hellmann's anymore at Walmart. What? All right. So you leave, you abandon your cart, literally abandon your cart, and you walk out that clear aisle that they made right down the center of the store, right out the doors, and you get in your car and you drive across town to the gigantic supermarket that your town has, and you go to the mayonnaise section, and what do you see? A wide selection of brands, and there's Hellmann's. And the prices, decent enough. At least they've got Hellmann's. And you look around and you go, you know what? I'm going to shop here from now on. People were defecting from Walmart because the brands were gone. In some sections of the store, in some stores, as much as 15% of the product was just gone. No explanation. And when people would ask the CEO and other top executives, why, what is the deal here, guys? They would say again and again, look, we know the numbers aren't so good, but customers say they love it. And another executive had a better summary that's I quoted somewhere, which was, customers said they loved it, but then they stopped buying there. Okay. So conclusion is, what customers say is often different from what they do, which I know is not a new concept to the people in this room. But it happens. It happens, okay? And this costs, by some conservative estimates, this cost Walmart about $1 billion. $1 billion. $1 billion. That was the impact of Project Impact. So now let's review the 3 steps of customers included. Did they observe customers directly? Maybe let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay, they ran research. Good for them. Play Pump didn't. These guys did. Did they discover the key unmet needs of the customers? No. The research was not good research because it didn't get at the key question. In my opinion, whatever method you're going to use, and there are a lot of methods out there, is only a good method if it actually finds out what people want. Why else do you do research but to find out what people want? And that's find out what people want. Another way to say that is discover their key unmet needs, and that's what Walmart did not do. It did not understand, it did not figure out through their rigorous research that people still depended on those 2 things. Wide selection of brands and low prices. If you take out 15% of the brands, it's not going to be a happy day. So what have we learned so far? Number 1, yes, this really does happen. I'm telling you, it happens all the time. And 2, it's really expensive. And that's on a good day. On a bad day, it actually can threaten lives, as we saw in the Play Pump example. So it's really important to look broadly at these issues, not simply, as Christian was saying in the introduction, not simply to look at everything through the usability lens of the interaction elements, take a step back and look at strategic projects, innovations, initiatives, and think, are the customers being included in this process or not? Because if they're not, some really bad things can happen. Okay, enough Debbie Downer stuff. Let's get to the third story. Brooklyn. This is a happy story, although it starts sad, but it gets better. This is Prospect Park. Any fans of Prospect Park in here? Yay! Anyone who's spent any time in Brooklyn knows Prospect Park. Beautiful park in the middle of the borough, and it was developed in the 19th century, just after Central Park was launched. And in fact, Prospect Park was designed by the same two gentlemen, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, although they used a completely different design aesthetic, which is a whole other conversation, but it's fascinating. If you're interested, by the way, there's a book called A Clearing in the Distance, which describes a lot of this very nicely, which I would recommend if you're into park design. So anyway, Prospect Park. Well, right when it was launched in the 19th century, huge success. People would come from all over the borough to ride in carriages and walk through the wild interior and just get relief from the urban environment. But the 20th century was not so good. It, through a series of not so good park administrators and or mayoral administrations and changing economics of the city, the park fell into disrepair, and it landed at the bottom in 1979 when the park looked like this. This is New York Times photographs from that era. Some of you remember this time in New York City's history. The entire city was in bad shape. It was nearing bankruptcy. It was a very dark time for the city. You can see graffiti on the JFK memorial here, and there were buildings that previously were beautiful and grand that were literally burned out. It was just best for people not to enter the park ever if they wanted to stay safe. So the city needed a new park administrator, and I mean, it was a huge surprise. Nobody really wanted the job. I mean, what are you going to do with this? So they did what any right-thinking administration would do at that point. They put a help wanted ad in the newspaper. Anybody want to run Prospect Park? Yay. And they got a strange application from I think she was 35 at the time, 35-year-old woman named Tupper Thomas, who the parks administrator later said seemed she had come from the moon. She just had this crazy, enthusiastic energy. There's just two small details that they needed to know. Number one, she was not from New York City. And number two, she had no experience running parks. But other than that, she was ready to dive in. So they gave Tupper Thomas the job. I mean, what else are they going to do, right? Someone wants the job, they give it to her. And in 1980, Tupper Thomas took on the role of administrator of Prospect Park. So let's role play again. We're Tupper Thomas, first day of work, Prospect Park, burned out buildings, physical plant is totally messed up. There's vermin, trash, all kinds of crime. It's unsafe. By the way, the city's bankrupt, or almost. You have no experience. You have no political contacts. No one owes you any favors. And it's raining. So what do you do? Like, what do you do? Well, if she was a top-down, traditional command and control thinker, what she would have done would have been to go to a whiteboard, if they had whiteboards in 1980, I don't remember, and start writing out all the problems that the park faced and do some kind of triage and prioritization. And I'm fairly sure if she had listed and then prioritized all the problems of the park, at or near the top would have been crime. I mean, come on. People can't even enter this park. We got to do something about this crime. And for all I know, previous administrators had done this very thing and maybe asked for more police patrols. We got to clean this thing up. Well, first of all, there's no money in the city. Maybe that had been tried already. And anyway, it wasn't what she did. She did not go to a prioritization of problems and start knocking them off, problem, solution, and so on. She couldn't, and she didn't. She did something else entirely. She did what very much resembles a customers included approach, although she didn't think of it that way at that time. What's the first thing she did? What's the first step? Yeah. She got out of the office and she went into the park. And by taking that action of actually putting herself in the context of her customers, the citizens, the residents of the surrounding neighborhoods, she took that first vital step that I would guess no other parks administrator had ever done in recent memory. Tupper Thomas went outside and she joined in the experience of the people she was supposed to serve. And she found out something amazing just by doing that. And that was that Prospect Park was not totally abandoned. There was one group of people left that was using Prospect Park for non-criminal reasons. See how carefully I worded that? There's one group of people left. Who were they? Skateboarders, good guess. No.
Chess players?
Chess players, good guess. No. You're thinking Washington Square Park. Who else? Sorry? Homeless? No, these are property owners in the neighborhood who are coming to Prospect Park for one specific reason. Dog walkers. Dog walkers. This comes from later years, obviously, but you know, Google image search on dog walker. I don't know. But I think that is actually Prospect Park. Dog walkers. Well, because if you live in the neighborhood, you know, you want to walk the dog, and everything's concrete all over in Brooklyn, but right there is green, you know, so let's walk the dog there and just stay on the rim of the park, and it should be safe enough. So there were some dog walkers. I mean, they were cautious. They were wary. But they had dogs, right? Yeah. This one in particular, you don't want to mess with. So Tupper started talking to these dog walkers. She got to know them, got to know their names, got to know the dogs' names, talking to them, listening to them. She never said, to my knowledge, hey, would you like it if there was less crime in Prospect Park? No. She just spent time with people. You know what? She's a human. They're human. We talk. It's like not that complicated. You spend time with people, you get to know them. And in those conversations over some period of time, there was one recurring refrain that she finally figured out, she discovered the key unmet need of the dog walkers. Now keep in mind, Prospect Park is not just for dog walkers, and this was not the only problem she had to solve. But she started here. She started with what she had, and she went and she talked to the customers, and the customers she had one unmet need. And this is a really tough one to guess. Can you guess what it was? Those are all good guesses. Lighting, trash, bathroom. No, it was leash laws. Here I am, there's like this whole field from here, an acre of green, and by law, I have to like run behind my dog the whole time. The dog wants to run. Let me just legally, so I don't get harassed by the cops, take the dog off the leash once in a while and let him run. Just give me a leash law, Tupper. So, she goes back to her office. I imagine she went there occasionally. Goes back to the whiteboard that she never filled out, so forget that. But crime, garbage, lighting, physical plant, buildings, capital improvement, you know, homeless, leash laws. Okay. She took all of her resources. I don't play poker, but what do? You take all your poker chips and put it, go all in, thank you. Or roulette, you put it all on black 37. Whatever metaphor you want. She had one shot and she put it all, not on crime or all these other things, she put it all on leash laws, which to an outside observer would sound insane. You're talking about dogs? But in a customers included mindset, it made all the sense in the world. These are the customers. I've gotten to know them. This is what they want. Leash laws. She got the leash laws passed. my memory serves, I believe they were the first leash laws in any major urban park in the US. Could be wrong, but I think so. It was a major win. She went back to the dog walkers and said, good news. Between the hours of 8 and 10 in this certain area, you can let your dogs off the leash. And they said, holy cow. For the first time, someone is actually listening to what we want and actually did something for us and improved the experience of coming to the park. No one's ever done that before. Hey, this is great. More dog walkers started coming in, and guess what happens when there are more dog walkers? The joggers who were coming by said, I guess I'll jog through the park. There are people there. Now there's dog walkers and there's joggers. And guess what? The ball players say, hey, we don't need that urban lot. I think, just beyond all those people running and walking dogs, there's a ball field. Let's play ball there. More people started coming in. Tupper Thomas went back outside, got to know them. What do you want? She didn't ask that, but, who are you? What do you do? And so on. And so whatever the next request was, and whatever the next request was, she fulfilled that. So her innovation path was defined by her interactions with the customers and what the customers needed each step of the way. Okay? So let's review how Tupper Thomas did on our little scorecard here. Number one, what's the first thing she did? She observed customers directly. She didn't look at some report from her office about look at the numbers. She went out and she observed customers directly, talked to them, got to know them, invested herself in getting to know these people and showing that she wanted to help them. A human wanted to help other humans. That's the level this operates at, I really believe. And number two, in doing those interactions and running that research, it was not simply to build this rarefied model of the anthropology of the culture of dog walkers in Prospect Heights or something like that. No. She did it with a specific purpose to find out what they wanted. That's the point of research. Find out what these people want. Don't ask them what they want. Find out what they want. So yes, she did number two. She found out they wanted leash laws. And number three, she built consensus. And this is the part I haven't told you yet. It wasn't enough for her to just give the leash laws and a couple more joggers come in. Yay! That doesn't clean up the park. It gives a few more people there. No, you then have to start enlisting the help of people to carry this forward, to carry the execution of this plan forward. And maybe we'll get into this more in the Q&A, but if there's one thing that I could offer in all of my work that I think has not gotten enough attention in this community, it is that it is not sufficient for us simply to get the right answer. We have to enlist the help of the decision makers and the rest of the organization, whatever context we work in order to push that right answer through to reality. And there's an entire section of the book just on that topic. And it takes different forms in different contexts. It's not always, doing what Tupper did. But in her case, she couldn't do it alone. She found the right answer, okay? She understood the customer experience, but she couldn't do it alone. She had to clean up the park with the help of other people. So she started what's called the Prospect Park Alliance, which is still running today. It's a public-private partnership that brings together financial support, political support, volunteerism to support the park and to clean up the park. And then once the park was clean, to start reinvesting in the park. And by the mid-2000s, this is actually what Prospect Park looked like. And as promised, in the foreground, you may witness a fixed-gear bicycle. So that's the thesis of the book, and is really an encapsulation of everything that Phil Terry and I have done in our careers at Creative Good. There's some mention of methods. Methods we like better than others, but that's really not the most. The most important thing is in the significant decisions that we're involved in our teams and organizations that affect somebody else. Are we including the customers in those decisions? But I think it's deeper than that. do we care enough about the people that we say we're here to serve to spend the energy and the time to listen to them and to put forth the effort to build something that benefits them in the long run? And I invite you to try it. So, thanks. (8:30). Cue number 1.
Hi. Do you care to comment about, there are some companies that have very famously succeeded by telling the customers what they want, whether they wanted it or not.
Like who?
Like Steve Jobs with that infernal one-button mouse.
The one I still use, you mean?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if you had any comments about how that fits into what you described.
Well, I'm really glad I wrote an entire chapter on that very question. And I knew it would come up early, so I made it chapter 3. This comes up all the time. But before I give my answer, what does somebody else think the answer is? Well, let's talk about Apple, because I want to make sure I understand your question and get a sense of what other people think. Is Apple, 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 Apple? What? Did Xerox PARC have some relationship to Apple's early? I really should read up on that sometime. Yeah. So, what do people think? Ron, you were there in the early days. Ron Lichty.
I was there in the middle days.
Middle days, okay.
But Larry was there in the early days.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Did Steve simply give people things and then convince them that they wanted them?
No, not really. He knew what people, he figured out that what people would want, but he did do it by indirectly observing and experimenting. He didn't want it, he pretended that it just sort of came out of the blue one day, but
Right.
didn't really.
That's a beautiful answer. Did you have a role in that, sir?
Yeah, actually, I was one of the instigators of the one-button mouse.
Okay. Well, you two have a lot of catching up to do, don't you? Well, that's essentially I wasn't there. I've been a Mac user since almost day one. Never stopped. So I've always been interested in the company and the products. And incidentally, if anybody here, this came up randomly during dinner. If anybody here is being forced to use a Mac and you're a lifelong Windows user and you're finding it annoying, I feel your pain, and I can tell you some improvements to the default installation that make your life better, so you can come find me. Okay, chapter 3. I'm just going to read the entire chapter right now. It's called Starting with the Customer Experience, and the pull quote is, Mr. Jobs didn't buy into focus groups. And basically, I did want to read one quote. Basically, the myth, the last thing you said was so perfect. He pretended like it just came out of thin air, but that wasn't really it. And both clauses are exactly right. There's a certain myth or legend or hero making around Steve Jobs that he participated in, okay? For whatever reason, for good reason, I suppose, you know. But much of the obituary and biography that came after his death fed right into that and did not look critically behind that legend. And what I try to do in this, admittedly, quick account is to look beyond that and say, look, yes, he was a great designer, but it was more than that. So I didn't want to, I didn't have space for an entire book on this. So I just chose one scene out of his career, which, strangely enough, never comes up in the Isaacson biography or the Times obituary or any of the other pieces. So, Jobs. And he was a great guy, but it was more than that. So if you really want to understand somebody, do you write a story as the Times did last Sunday on the peak moment, the iPhone demo? If you really want to understand someone, their character, is that where you go, the peak? No, you go to the bottom. And when was the bottom for Steve? It was, it's in the notes, I think it was May 1997. He had just come back. Apple, much like New York City in 1979, was teetering on bankruptcy. There's no resources. And there was, this is kind of funny, there was one group of support left. No, it wasn't the dog walkers. Who was it? It was the last few developers, like the ones who were just like, never, you can take my one-button mouse when you rip it out of my cold, dead hands, those guys. Those were the last ones left. And so it was the WWDC, not the sleek turtlenecked WWDC, but in the YouTube video, a quote from which I'm going to read you, and this video is online. You can watch it tonight. He's sitting on a stool, and he's got these crazy, like, patched 1990s jeans. It was pretty awesome, sorry. Anyway, it was a different Steve Jobs. So he's taking Q&A from the crowd, this group of grumpy developers, and some of them are asking very nerdy questions or whatever, and then one stands up and says, hey, talking to Steve that way, hey, what have you been doing for the last 7 years? Sits down, and there's this, ooh. So he's got a mutiny on his hands. Company, we've now learned, had what, like 3 months of cash left? I mean, it was almost game over. He had just come on, he was the interim CEO, about to become the actual CEO, and I would argue that his career at Apple hung in the balance on his answer to this question. What have you been doing? That was a challenge to his leadership, just coming back. If he flubbed this question or broke under the pressure, never would have worked. These guys would have defected. So what did he say? To a room full of software developers, when his career was hanging in the balance, and all of what Apple did later, really because of Steve, iPhone, or iPod, iPhone, iPad, iTunes, and everything else, came in this statement. He said, to effect change, so let me just read this freaking thing to you. Gosh, sorry. Blah, 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 blah. Video footage, blah, blah. Okay. The video shows Jobs sitting quietly on his stool, head bowed for almost 15 seconds. It was really just like this. When did you ever see Jobs do that at a WWDC? He goes, what are you doing? 15 seconds. Before launching into a brilliant ad-libbed speech, Jobs said that to effect change, one needs a cohesive, larger vision, okay, that can drive billions of dollars of sales. Then he revealed his vision to do that. So basically he's saying, this is what Apple's going to do, guys. My last base of support technologists, let me tell you. And he said, and this is verbatim, you can watch it, he said, our vision is you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. Are you serious? He said that? To his last base of support, technologist, at the lowest point of his career, he banked it all on that. You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and then try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. As we've tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with, what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers, like all you guys at WWDC, and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that? And he went from there to generate the iPod, the iPhone, and everything else. And we have a case study in the iPhone as well. When push came to shove, came to mutiny, came to his career and his company hanging in the balance, Jobs banked publicly, explicitly, on the customer experience. To the last people, you would probably want to say this too. It's not about the technology guys, it's about the customer. And he won. And that's my answer to you. Yes, Jobs, in that scene, never comes up in any of the hagiography that came a couple of years ago. No, no, no. He was, it was, no, and he was brilliant, but it was more than that. The guy cared about the customer, and he cared about creating benefits for the customer that he was trying to serve. Whether it was directly going out and being among customers like Tupper Thomas did, or some kind of indirect, like Zen ninja mojo that he had going on. Somehow, he was using that customer experience sense to drive the entire organization, to benefit the customer at every step. And that's why I think Apple succeeded the way it did, because Jobs, unlike any other CEO that I can think of, banked everything in the company on that one idea, and he acted on it. It was just strange that he built a legend for himself that backed away from that. Sorry, gosh, that was like 10 minutes.
I really like your example of the Prospect Park, and I think the one thing I come away with is it's a little uncommon to hear references to New York neighborhoods and consensus together. At a more general level, I've run into many situations where companies do everything right up to the point where they have a list of different customers who have what seem to be connected needs, but end up with just a vast variety of different things they have to fulfill, often many of them contradicting each other. What are what's the means by which you deal with that sort of problem where you can't actually generate the consensus at the end? You've done everything up to that point correctly, but you're just not getting anyone agreeing on these things.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the organization is often the trickiest bit. And large organizations can have many different constituencies inside as well as outside that are trying to be served. And there's no easy answer. I mean, we say again and again, there's no magic bullet, no easy answer. There's no tip or trick that's going to solve this. And as I said, I hesitate to even call this a process. It's more of a mindset of trying to get people to think about benefiting the customer. It's a pretty low bar, you know, like rather than completely ignore them, let's think of them a little bit. If we can do that, it's a giant advance. With that caveat, I will say that there's one small Jedi mind trick that I have found very helpful over the years. In some situations where consensus is difficult, but it is possible. In some of those, frankly, the equation just doesn't net out. It may just not be possible. But in some cases, consensus is possible if you could just get people to see the reality of the customer experience and what needs to happen. And it's a really simple thing, and I rarely hear talked about on UX blogs and papers and stuff like that. I think this one thing that I'm going to tell you, which many of you already know, it sounds so obvious. This one thing is as important or possibly more important than all the methodological discussions that go on in the field about which method and which process. And this is the trick. If there's a consensus to be built among different decision makers or warring factions or executive A with followers and executive B with followers, and they have the different, and there's no easy way to get through the impasse. Here's what you do. You go to executive A and you say, look, can I ask you for a favor? Just one day out of your schedule, if you don't mind. Just come with me. We're going to do this thing, blah, 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 blah. Just don't worry about it. Just leave your cell phone here and come with me. And you go to executive B and say the same thing. Come with me, come with me. And you bring all of the parties in the political conflict behind the same one-way mirror. And then you bring in a string of customers to have, and this is where you get into methodology. Almost any method would work. I prefer the non-directed research to show that they're not being coached and you weren't bought by one of the factions. You're just letting customers talk. And after a customer has an experience, where invariably in cases like this, you're here because it's a terrible experience, so it's pretty low-hanging fruit. The person's saying, this sucks. And we actually have examples verbatim from research in the book where people are saying, we recruited people, this is, I'll just call it a large financial firm, we recruited consumers who loved this brand. They're lifelong customers, they love it. And so they would come in, and the executives, there was a political conflict, and they were on two sides of a political conflict, and they were sitting. We forced them to sit and watch. Put down the BlackBerry, sit and watch these people. People would come in, and they would say, oh, yeah, oh, nice to meet you. Yeah, so you know Acme Finance? Oh, I love Acme Finance. I love them. I love everything they do. Okay, great, great, great. You know, then a few minutes later, they're using whatever the new product was. Oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. This is awful. I would never use this. This sucks. You know, and then you dismiss the person and the people, and then you go out of the room and behind the glass, and you say, and I quote, this is what you say. You say, so what did everybody see? That's what you say. And someone says, well, that didn't go very well. And you go, oh, okay. Any other observations? Just play dumb. And both factions begin agreeing on what they just saw. But somebody, some smarty in the back is going to say, that wasn't statistically significant. That was just one person. Yeah, everyone's had that experience. And you go, you know what? I hadn't even thought of that. You're right. And you know what? It's time for number 2. Excuse me. You go get number 2. Bring in, oh, I love the company. That's great. Oh, yeah? Well, tell me, oh, this sucks. This sucks. And they come out, and then you go back as innocently as you can. So what did everybody see? And, well, that wasn't good either, you know. And then you do that again and again and again. And throughout the day, there's what the warring factions don't know is that the research is being conducted on both sides of the glass. You're quietly managing and facilitating both sides. It's a stage play that you're managing. I mean, it's not with a script. It is non-directed. You really do want to know what customers say. But you're managing the environment in both places. And you're quietly, what you're doing behind the glass is getting the stakeholders to come to an agreement. It almost doesn't matter what the agreement is. You don't have any predefined notions because you haven't been bought by one of the factions. You want the truth, but you want people to agree to the truth, whatever it is. So by simply saying, what did you see? What, oh, really? Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, that's 5 out of 5. Is it okay? It's, wow, 8 out of 8 people said the same. Oh, did they? Really? I didn't even notice. Okay. Wow, 100% of the people said this completely sucked. That's a great observation. I hadn't even crossed my mind. Okay, and at the very end of the day, you know, the haggard, hangdog, depressed looks of the executives, they've been beaten into submission, not by a consultant with bells and whistles, and I'm smarter than you. No, a good consultant, in my opinion, fades into the background and simply lets the experience emerge. The stakeholders have been beaten into submission by the one person in the world who can actually do that they'll allow to do that to them, and that's the customer. Because no stakeholder in that environment is going to say, you know what? I've had enough of these customers telling us things about the customer experience. I hate customers, and run out of the room. That's the one thing they can't say. They can say they hate you, the consultant. They can say they hate the facility. They didn't like their M&Ms. But no one is going to publicly deny the truth of a non-directed customer. And that is the lever that I've found over the years at Creative Good, is the one tool that never breaks. I can use the customer to leverage change in an organization. And that has broken so many roadblocks and impasses and warring factions. And it's beautiful. It's not even because I came up with some brilliant idea. It's simply because I'm setting up an environment where a company can see the truth of their customer experience, which is, by the way, what I think how our discipline should be defined. Not as a collection of methods, but whether we are exposing the truth about how we are affecting customers to the organization. It's bringing together the company and the people they're serving in an honest way.
This may sound like a basic or stupid question, but what was Playpump really thinking? Shouldn't they have been trying to find communities that didn't already have a reliable water source instead of finding those that already did? Or perhaps it's just a small sample size? I don't know.
Well, first of all, far from a stupid question, that's a very cogent and smart question. And let me ask you, what do you think they should have done?
Perhaps look for villages or communities that didn't already have water supplies and try to create a supply chain of water towards them.
And what kind of pump should they have installed? You mean put the merry-go-round there?
Well, what I'm saying is the basic principle should have been just get people who don't have water.
Right.
I mean, sure, one pump is better than their pump, but any pump would be better than none.
Right. Right? Any other
No.
opinions?
Well,
I think it's a reasonable. I'm sorry? I don't think so. I don't think they had to remove one to put in the other. Well, I've been hiding something from you because, yes?
so, you know, when we release another release of software, we generally performance test it against the previous release to show that the performance is at least not worse.
Well, as it turns out, I mean, these are all good answers, and I think there's a rich discussion to be had, you know, forgetting what I'm about to tell you, about just exercise this muscle. What could they have done? What are different ways of framing the problem? How could you have organized the stakeholders to think about it differently? How would you have engaged the customers? What about the engineers without borders who are already on the ground? Could you have leveraged their help? There's like 15 different ways that you can think of doing things differently, better in some ways, better in other ways. It's a really rich question. As it turns out, as I went way deep on this. If you can believe it, there's a guy who wrote his PhD dissertation on the play pump. I mean, that's how deep it goes. And that had a whole set of footnotes and bibliography that went even deeper. It was like Alice in Wonderland. So somewhere in there, and it took me weeks. I was just going into this. Somewhere in there, I came across a little reference somewhere about Peter Morgan. Who? Yeah, Peter Morgan. Who? You don't know Peter Morgan? No, never heard of Peter Morgan. Has anyone here heard of Peter Morgan? No. It's amazing. Peter Morgan. No? Well, in researching the play pump, I thought, this guy wrote his dissertation, and it's basically this deconstruction of how the play pump was misguided from the beginning because it was designed not for the villagers, it was designed for us, the Western media audience that craves more innovations and more design awards and more clever solutions to big problems so we can feel like we're saving the world or something like that. You can read it. But I thought, okay, that's good, but let's have a positive coda to the story. What could have been done? Do we have any data of anyone who's ever tried to just give water to people who don't have water in a different way, in a better way? There's a guy named Peter Morgan who created a pump in a completely different way, and it had completely different results. And there's a pump named the Zimbabwe bush pump B-type. It's never won any design awards, never been covered in Name the Innovation magazine of your choice. And really, it's not worth mentioning, except that it's been used in thousands of villages for 20 years and has provided water successfully to millions of people. It's one instance of notoriety that I could find in all my research is that one time it was featured on a Zimbabwe postage stamp. True story. The Zimbabwe bush pump B-type. So what is the Zimbabwe? Well, as the name B-type would suggest, it's a sequel. It's a sequel to the A-type. And Peter Morgan is this guy who'd been working on the ground in the context, getting to know the people and the villages and their needs, and he's interested in water management, and he saw how a lot of villages had this bush pump that was pretty good. It had been developed in 1933 by a guy named Tommy Murgatroyd, worked pretty well, but you know what? Some of the parts would break in certain ways in a lot of the pumps, and the manufacturing process was a little more expensive than it needed to be, so it was out of reach for some villages, I suppose. So he came up with an innovation. Yes, it's an innovation that was an improvement over an existing device. It wasn't some brand new idea that came floating out of the sky, only an iPhone is an innovation. No, an innovation is something that helps somebody. It's new in some way, and he took the A-type, he made some improvements, and created the B-type. And then he added one more layer, He said, and he writes a book called Rural Water Management. It's a great read from 1990. He writes in his book, if a village wants a bush pump, wants a Zimbabwe bush pump B-type, they are required to come to sessions beforehand to learn about the pump, to learn how to repair the pump, learn how to maintain the pump, and by the way, they're going to participate in the installation of the pump. In other words, the technology isn't just an assemblage of metal parts, it's the whole context. It's the community. The community is part of the pump too. Remember what the SCAT report said about the play pump? Communities had not been included. Peter Morgan explicitly writes a policy that's just the opposite. This pump only exists if the community is included. And if the community is not behind it, I'm not bringing the pump into that village. Sorry, but no, because it's not going to work. So the reason the bush pump works is because it has the buy-in of the customers. The customers are literally included in the process of the design and installation and maintenance of this pump. And that's a different, you can reflect on that as you go home tonight and you think about your projects and your project work. What's a way that you could take something that you're involved in and include the customer in some way that would improve the outcomes of the project? And I hope you'll read the book. It actually is, I'm biased, but it actually is worth reading. And especially the Peter Morgan case study is a case study that deserves to be known because this guy's completely unknown, and he's saved how many lives? With what looks like a very ordinary pump, but it's a brilliant innovation. And that's the kind of innovation that I think we as a discipline and a society need to be exposing more than just the flashy, superficial things. So, Steve?
I noticed that the 3 stories you told, which are very informative, none of them came from computer companies. And while we're a computer organization by definition, I know that your practice is much wider than that from your newsletter and so on. I read about some of the stuff you work on, and it's not many of the projects you work on are not in the computer industry. But I'm assuming that there are examples that you can give other than Apple, maybe even very current examples of products that are going to have unintended consequences. Of course, I'm trying to lead you to something that we talked about a couple of months ago.
Oh, yes. Well, and we'll finish with this, yes? Because I think everybody has to get home. It's 9. Or we can stay. It's up to you guys.
It's nice to take a break at 9.
A few months ago, what Steve's referring to is a column I wrote in my newsletter in February called on Google Glass. Some of you may have read it. It was called the one feature of Google Glass. What was it called?
Something like the biggest unintended consequence.
No, it was something about the feature. Oh, the
Feature
Google
nobody's
Glass
talking
feature
about.
that they're not telling you about, or something like that. Ooh, which one are they not telling me about? Because I knew some people out there really like to get the latest feature, so it was kind of a silly headline. And basically what I said was that, here's how, and I'll say this, that little 1,000-word piece that I wrote in a couple of hours over 2 sessions is by far the most read piece that I've ever written. I've written thousands of columns and blog posts and reports and a couple of books over the years. And that one column, it was the only thing that I've ever written that actually went viral. It went bananas. I mean, most of my stuff gets, like 40 shares across all the social media services, like, woo! And this one got like 50,000 or something. It just went crazy, and media are calling and stuff. So and it hasn't happened since, so I hope it didn't go to my head. It's a one-time thing. But what happened was, one of the Google guys was at a well-known conference in Long Beach the day before and gave an onstage demo of Google Glass, which I think was maybe the first public demo of Google Glass. And he gets on stage, look at this, and ooh, and he said, let me just grab a prop. And he says, where's my prop? That's not what he said, but here it is. He says, you don't want to be using this featureless piece of glass. It's, what was the word he used? emasculating. Like, so many things, so many reasons I did not want to hear him say that. Inappropriate line of conversation for him to engage in. But anyway, this featureless piece of glass is emasculating. So today I'm announcing glass, which apparently, anyway, so many things wrong with the demo. So the technology media explodes in a chorus of hosannas. We're saved. Finally, there's something to replace this gadget with another gadget that everyone will buy, and we have something to write about. It's innovative. It's disruptive. It's lean. I don't know what buzzwords they threw at it. Every buzzword they could come up with. And I was reading, I wasn't at the conference, sadly, but I read the coverage. That's what I do. I read hype all day, and I go, And like most days. And something didn't sit well with me about the demo and the coverage. I couldn't put my finger on it. I mean, yeah, it's kind of a cool device. It has some cool features. It is innovative. It's using technology in a new way. I don't mean to, I'm having some fun with it, but I don't mean to denigrate it. They're trying something new, and I salute Google for doing that. But something was rubbing me the wrong way about it, and it finally clicked all at once. I realized that the user experience that everybody was talking about Google Glass, was not the user experience of the person wearing Google Glass. Yes, there is a user experience, and you can blink your eyes and do this, and that's kind of cool and good gadget stuff, but that's not the user experience that we need to focus on. Taking a step back, again, kind of like we talked about the play pump, look at the whole context, look at the whole stage set in context, and you see a person with Google Glass getting onto a bus, let's say, and everyone on the bus realizing that they're being recorded. And that this camera that's got the red light on the Google Glass is hooked up to the cloud servers at Google for permanent storage and indexing. And if you, as a citizen, a law-abiding citizen, where it happened to be within speaking distance of someone wearing a Google Glass device, and it was recording, anything you say or do in the range of that camera will be stored permanently within Google. Not that they would do anything with it, of course. Not that no evil, and there would be no breach of security. Couldn't, hasn't ever been. So even if there was no evil and there was no breach, it's still a subpoena away from a search on the words you said and using a facial recognition algorithm.
Mark, can I inject something there?
Sure.
This only occurred to me today, that with all the NSA revelations that have happened recently, NSA's excuse is, no, we're not collecting your phone calls, right? We are storing them someplace, but we're not collecting them because they're not collected until somebody looks at them. And then I remember that Google is being sued for scanning the email and displaying relevant ads, scanning the content of the email you're composing and displaying relevant ads. And their defense is, well, nobody's reading it. We're storing it on our computers. Right. We're scanning it on our computers, but nobody's reading it. What Google is saying about that storage is the same as what NSA is saying about it.
Pay no attention to the search algorithm behind the curtain. It has nothing to do with anything. I mean, whether someone reads it or not is immaterial. The fact is it's there and it's indexed and it's searchable, which is the entire reason that Google is around. Everything is searchable. And so I realized, wow, okay, now when I walk down the street, yes, there are video cameras, security cameras all around. I live in Manhattan. There's security cameras everywhere I walk, but those aren't being fed into a central database that the feds are then going to use. And it's also not in every, like if someone wearing Google Glass comes into your personal space, your home, your apartment, your car, suddenly you're out of range of all the other video cameras except for one. So it's like you can, not to get too conspiracy minded, but you can play it out to the ramifications of a panopticon of, a million video cameras on the streets, just indexing everything around them. So I thought not that Google, I didn't think that Google was up to something nefarious. I just thought it would be worth pointing out that this is something we should think about rather than just talking about the cool gadget factor, but talking about the experience of everyone else who's not wearing glass. And it seemed to work well. And the thing that I learned from that is that in evaluating a new technology, look beyond the initial user interface of the experience and think about the whole context of the experience. And often if you think about the experience in context, you get some insights that you wouldn't have otherwise. So.
Okay. I was going to say it's okay.
No, we can take a little more time. We have two people.
That's more up to Mark.
Go ahead.
I'm fine with it, yeah. If you guys have the...
People are free to leave.
Yeah. You're free to leave if you don't like it.
Please.
I wanted to ask something. I've actually wanted to ask this for years, and I haven't found it in many books, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this or if you cover it in your book. A couple of people here have brought up software industry, and I work in software. And customers are kind of a hot commodity when we can get access to a customer and when we get the legal contracts in place and we can actually mine information from them. Everyone wants them, and they're under lock and key, so to speak. And in the group that I work in, and I don't know how many people here are in the same situation, but we can't access the customers. I'd love to sit and talk to them and really find out what they want without asking, you know, would you like our software to be easier to use? Most cases, we have to give them kind of a questionnaire, and it's hard to not lead them when they're looking at a piece of paper. So I wondered what your thoughts were on that, if you have any insights to good ways to engage with the customer when you're not even really allowed within, you know.
Well, I don't know this. Are you in finance or healthcare? Security?
Software.
Just software. It's different. 'Cause
Technology software, not.
okay. Well, I mean, we've done work in healthcare where there's all kinds of legal HIPAA restrictions, and we've worked in finance where similarly it's a little bit restrictive. I don't know, it's tough. You know, just from what you've described, it's tougher to get insights than it would be otherwise. I don't know your specific situation, but is there a way that you can observe people without mining their...
I have to go through the development groups. You know, they talk to the customers. We don't talk to the customers. But they say, hey, if you have any questions, you know, give it to us and we'll forward it. But I really want to sit in a room and watch the customer use our software.
And are you barred from doing that legally?
They usually, not barred, but the engineers who work with customers travel to customer sites, and they're not going to bring the customers in.
Right.
And they're not going to, you know, do any kind of teleconferencing on it.
Right.
So it just makes it really difficult.
That's
and then,
difficult.
on the other hand, we're told, you know, find out what the customer wants, and we're like, okay, well, how? And so I don't know if there's a trick or something.
It's an organizational problem.
Yeah.
And I've worked in system management software my whole career, and when I worked in the development, we would go to, you know, on betas or sometimes go to customer meetings and things like that. But, you know, there are all kinds of barriers, and all I can suggest is to try to get involved and, you know, get funded to go, when they install a beta, go there.
Yeah, pull a Tupper Thomas on them. Just put it all on,
Just
I'm
go.
going. You know, look, if you're interested in finding out what customers want, and the organization isn't letting you spend time with customers, you know, there's a lot of organizations out there that would like to have good health. So it's always an option.
I'll keep it quite brief for you. I like your process, and I think this is all very interesting, but I wondered how you work with your clients to define who the user is, because I would imagine with the play pump example, they just had the wrong user in their head. Like you said, it would be fantastic for children that are bored at daycare or something like that, but not in sub-Saharan Africa. So how do you make sure that the user that you're targeting is the correct user?
Right, that's a good question. I mean, when we do our projects, and you know, there's a lot of different methods, but what we generally do is we start with a phase of business assessment. Well before we get to any research, get in front of any customers, we spend time with all the stakeholders, one-on-one interviews within the organization. And then we read through any kind of information they have, strategy documents, past research, past usability reports. So we try to understand what is the mind of the organization that we're dealing with. And often when there are conflicts about who the user is, those bubble up in that first phase. And it's really important to get those out before you go to research. So we can say, hey, go to the sponsor who hired us. Hey, you're backing this faction that says the user is X, but your lateral competitor over here has user Y. So what is this project again? And often, it's happened quite a few times over the years that we're hired for one thing, and then we spend time with the organization and realize nobody knows what the project actually is. And if that happens, we don't schedule the research. We say, whoa. We have to make sure we're all on the same page. Like, why are we here? And because we need to make sure that you feel that we did the right job. Like, what's the job we're supposed to do here? And go through that process. This is another thing that I feel is somewhat lacking in discussions of user experience, which tend to focus more on what happens in the research context itself rather than what happens on either side of it. And there's a lot of organizational politics and jargon and different kinds of documents you have to read in order to be able to do this, in order to run good research. So, for a good researcher to come in and know who the customer is, they will have had to exercise many different skill sets before they got to that point. And I think that would be really helpful for practitioners to be taught that in master's programs. Like, how to read a strategy document is really important in order to run good customer research so that you can uncover those. It's a great question.
Actually, a follow-up to the previous question. If you can't get the customers to come to you, it's also useful to try and go to places where the customers tend to be, whether it's user forums or conventions. I don't know what type of software it is that you're working on, but if you know that there's places where those people collect or air their grievances even against the software, then register for a user forum. I had a professor once in my grad program say, just Google the name of your software and the word sucks and see what comes up. It's a lot more anecdotal stuff, yeah, but you might start seeing some trends, in the absence of any data.
Just one point. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Very, very good point.
Hi. That's really true what you say, just considering the end-to-end experience, from, just the early vision all the way through to get to customer even. What I wanted just to mention too is the issue of localization, and that's something for global products and understanding global customers has offered just a lot, because it's been such trial and error. I mean, talk about even naming. Like, you had that one acronym, SCAT, and there are a number of funny stories globally of, what do we call this product? It's going to be global. And they didn't do their localization research, and they found even like the word was offensive in another language. And you probably come across so many examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there are firms that specialize just in that step. It's so important. It's not one of our specialties, but there are some very skilled practitioners who, have databases of all the taboo words in every country and culture around the world. It's a very important step. Should we? Oh, there's one more.
You mentioned doing research where you're going out to look at the customer. Do you have any rules of thumb for using customer support where people are calling in angry, and the way you can manage that feedback?
Customer service or call center best practices. We have done some of that work within our projects, but I wouldn't say that I'm knowledgeable enough myself to comment much on it. I mean, anybody else some call center, customer service expertise? Can
I
answer the
think
question?
he's asking whether the people, so if you can't get contact with customers, should I talk to people who have contact with customers, like support people? Or salespeople, or product managers?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, is that like a valuable input channel into this whole scheme of seeing, identifying the need, the unmet needs?
Sure, sure. I mean, especially in contexts where you're limited in your contact with customers, whatever you can get, forums. I mean, all the suggestions have been floated here. My goal in this book is not to be too prescriptive about. We do describe this non-directed method we call listening labs for what it's worth. We offer it for what it's worth, but there's a whole universe of methods and situations, just like the globalization. We didn't cover it all in the book, but it's a very important step. So the answer is yes. I don't cover it in the book. I think the point I'm trying to make in the book is, hey, everybody, let's start noticing when companies make massive billion-dollar decisions without ever doing any significant customer research at all, and let's see what we can do to change that. Maybe by getting the salespeople to talk to the customers. Just that might make a huge difference. Thank you. All right, thanks everybody.